And I want this to be a conversation because we have heard a lot of messages, we have heard a lot of commitment. I want to welcome first Her Excellency Ambassador Fatima Mohammed. I've known as a supporter of young women, as a mentor, as someone who shows up. So thank you for joining us at the summit. And I really want to take it up from where Aisha left, Ambassador. She said a lot, and with a lot of pain and a lot of hopes. The reality, not only of Nigerian women, everything she said resonates with me as a Tunisian, as a Pan-African. So what are your comments on it?
Well, thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you really for this invitation, Aya. And I just want to recognize especially the young women, the 17 council members who organized this initiative. It's really, really fascinating, and I really was committed to try and be part of this, either virtually or in person. And I'm really glad that I was actually able to come here in person to my city, my hometown, to be amongst my people. It's really a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. And really, it's really hard to beat my sister Aisha. You know, she's always there, a storm in every room, just saying it as it is. And I think this is an example of literally putting your money where your mouth is. You know, with the Nalafem initiative itself, we do have a lot of policies, strategies, constantly talking. Aya, for 2 years, you were our youth envoy of the African Union, and you attended so many meetings, conferences, a lot of talk. But action, I think, is what is really missing. And I think this initiative is one where you can actually see that there is action that is matching some of the words and commitments that we have made. So congratulations to you, and congratulations to all of the council members. Now, there are a number of things that have been raised today. I think it was wonderful to hear the points that you raised, Aisha, in terms of how we tend to be suppressed as women. Even when we're able to have the platforms to express ourselves, beyond the expressions, very little tends to happen. And that is something that we absolutely have to change. We have to match our words with action. We have to have a balance in terms of being out there, being visible, advocating. But behind the scenes, we also have to match that with action. We all have different capabilities, and we have to be able to use those capabilities in such a way that allows us to make the kind of progress that we need to make in order to see true equality and true opportunities for all women across the board. Thank you.
Following up on that, on your point of we have a lot of progressive policies, and at the African Union we do. We have one of the most progressive documents and frameworks. I mean, we're the only continent that have an African Youth Charter, which also recognize the rights of young women and girls. But there has been always this challenge with intergovernmental institutions. When young people rise up for their rights, when the NSOS movement was on the streets here, we receive a lot of feedback from young people. Why is the African Union silent on these issues? This is what's happening in the streets. Where is the gap between policy and implementation, and why our institutions and our leaders don't stand up when we need them the most?
Well, thank you for that, and I think it's a critical point that you've raised. We do recognize already that the gaps exist, and I think part of our initiatives is to ensure that we bridge that gap. So making sure that we continue to advocate, to continue to educate, to continue to, like I said in the beginning, put our money where our mouth is and go beyond the words, is the only way that we can ensure that we continue to bridge that gap. Initiatives that happen within certain countries or member states. For the African Union, you have to understand that as an intergovernmental organization, and particularly for the Commission does not exist without its member states, right? So whatever you do is based on initiatives or decisions taken by those member states. We may have policies that exist, but those have to be implemented. If they're implemented, they have to be implemented by the member states. Now, where the opportunities exist, especially for movements, especially for civil society, is for them to take up those policies and decisions that are taken by leadership, and to make sure that they're able to implement and hold them to the extent that you can accountable based on those policies. So if you go out on the street advocating for issues and you don't have the policies to back you up, it ends up becoming a lot of words and a lot of energy wasted. Wasted in a good sense, okay? I'm not saying that because you're out in the street advocating, you have not done what you need to do because you're raising awareness, and that is important. But at the same time, you have to have some sort of parallel support in terms of looking at what exists where the policies are concerned.
But we have the African Youth Charter.
And let me get there. And go through the systems that exist in place. Why do we have parliamentarians? Parliamentarians are in the system to represent the people. You hold them accountable through the policies that exist. Look, we have the Kampala Convention. We have 1 million+ IDPs. What are we doing? Have we domesticated this policy? Have we translated it into national law? If we have, why is it that our leadership is not committing and actually taking steps towards, and that goes across for all, even with the Charter. How does the African Union implement the Charter without its member states? And if you go across this room now and actually ask, how many people are actually familiar with the Charter? How many people are actually familiar with the gender strategy? We have to be able to take these things, understand them, and use them to our advantage. But if it's done and decisions are taken and then you leave it for institutions alone to implement, it's not going to happen.
I want to actually get 2 questions from the floor on this session, so get ready with a mic to move around for 2 questions to Ambassador. Ambassador, you came on a long journey, but it started in New York, where you're based as a representative of the African Observer, permanent observer of the African Unity in the United Nations. And we've been following on the news the overturn of abortion rights in the United States. We had a young women roundtable 2 days ago with the council, and they have raised issues around what does that mean for global rights for women. As a Tunisian, we actually had abortion rights and voting rights even before the United States. But looking at countries looking at the backlash or the backwards of continuing to fight for our rights and being on the edge of losing them again, but particularly abortion rights as well.
Well, thank you for that. I'll say this. I find it quite interesting that you raised that particular issue, and you made reference to another continent and another country. And I think this is where we tend to have challenges, and it's one of our biggest gaps. We have our own challenges. The reality is we have our own challenges, and we tend to always look at where other people are fighting for other issues and start fighting those fights for them. Before we even go to abortion rights, what about the issue of just gender equality? What about the issue of just access to basic rights, like education, like health, like sexual and gender-based violence? Have we addressed those issues? I always have this constant challenge whenever we tend to forget the reality of what we're going through, particularly on our own continent, in our own country. The issue of poverty. I mean, it is very high. It is the majority of the population that we're talking about on this continent, across the board. I try not to generalize Africa, but when it comes to the issue of poverty, it's something that we can generalize. When people don't have the basics, food to eat, access to education, access to basic health, you have malaria at home and there's nobody to there's no clinic in your local community to be able to take you to get treatment for malaria. And you're there advocating because the United States had overturned a particular rule. Yes, it's important. But what about our own issues, Aya? You know, this is something that I feel very strongly about personally. And I think we have to be very careful in terms of prioritizing what our own issues are first, while obviously looking at the bigger picture in terms of what affects us in the broader sense. Thanks.
Yeah, our issues are definitely intersectional, right? And our movements and struggles are definitely intersectional and interconnected. So the same when we say Black Lives Matter, you know, when we care about causes that happen all over the world, it means your liberation, whatever you are as a woman, especially as Afro-descended women. And we know what, you know, our African women suffer from all across the world. I think the point I'm making here is that even if it happened anywhere in the world, not particularly the United States, but our issues are intersectional and we cannot shy away from whatever happens in one country, how it affects all of our cause and how it allows forces in our countries to use that to also backlash on our own rights, right?
You do have a point there, but the point I'm trying to make is in terms of prioritization, okay? Some of our issues are bigger than that, and that's the point I'm trying to make. But there's no doubt there are interdependencies, and there are effects, causes and effects, no doubt about that. But I'm just talking about prioritization.
And this is why I love it's an intergenerational conversation. So I want to take 2 questions. So I go with Rose. Please, the mic to Rose, and then to Jaha.
Thank you very, very much for that. It is a fire chat, and it's meant to spur fires inside of us. And it has spurred mine because I have been in the public service for 10 years, and I recognize the language of government. And the language of government is more important than this other issue. But the actual reality is that all issues are important and on the same scale. It doesn't matter if you have food on the table but no dignity. It doesn't matter if you have clothes to wear but are abused every day. It doesn't matter if you have a roof over your head but cannot access basic reproductive rights. And so my struggle and constant conversation with myself is, how do I recognize that all these issues are important, and how do we go beyond the language of diplomacy, language of realities, lived realities?
Yeah. No, that's a very good point, Rose. But you know, I started, if you were listening to me earlier, I started by saying that everybody has a role to play across the board. So if you work for government, for example, you have your language, you have your priorities, you understand how that works. If you work for civil society, where you have a lot more independence in terms of expressing your own personal opinions and what you think and how you think you should advocate, you should do that. If you work in private sector, for example, the role and responsibility that you have is also different, and it tends to be, when it comes to private sector, you probably even have access to more resources to be able to back up some of your thinking. So it's important that we all understand what our role is, how we work together. And you know, it underscores this point about the intergenerational. And this is why I love Aya, because we generally tend to have these kind of conversations. It's important to listen, right? For us on a particular generation to listen to those before us and after us, and vice versa. And the challenge, and I've said this to you before, Aya, you see, I have always been an advocate for young women. This has been my thing from day one. I actually run a mentorship program within my office specifically because of that. And one of the biggest challenges that I find is the issue of listening across the board, but especially with young women. Because when we're strong and we know that we're fighting for something, we tend to deafen our ears and not listen to the others. we're not always right. We have to open up our ears and listen to those before us, especially those that have the experience, so that we can learn. That's the only way you can lead. But if you're leading blindly and just plugging your ears and think that you're the one that is right because this is what we're fighting for, then we're going to lose the battle, I promise you. So it is important, what you said, in terms of understanding what is happening globally, but we have to adapt it to our own reality. Last point I'm going to make on that, you talked about the access to sexual, and what was the word that you actually used? Reproductive and health rights. Do we have basic access to basic health opportunities? You know, that's the question that we have to ask. Many of the countries that you're looking for that are advocating on this, the average person, the average woman, if you look at, you know, we talk about child marriage, for example. Young women enter into marriage, forced marriage, a lot of it because of poverty. They're having kids at a very young age. The death toll is very high in developing countries, but do you know why that is? It's the lack of access to health clinics. So 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds in the developed countries, look at the statistics in the United States, they're having babies. They may not be married, but they're having babies, and they're not dying. Why is that? You know, these are questions that we have to ask ourselves, and we have to look at the data. The reality is the data tells the truth, and we're really not following the science when it comes to a lot of the advocacy that we're doing. So I think it's important that we know the reality in our own societies and adapt to that. Thank you.
I know we're running out of time, so I want to give Jaha the chance to also comment and ask her a question.
So I guess the comment that I wanted to make is how all of these issues are very, very interconnected. As someone who went through child marriage, I didn't want to have kids when I did. And with what's happening in the US right now with the Roe v. Wade, the way it impacts us, like institutions like UNFPA, for instance, right? When Trump became president, the amount of funding that the US government gives to institutions like UNFPA and others that are working on this issue was cut. So the reason why the Supreme Court issued this law is not for women like you and I who can still travel and access abortion if we need to, but the people that are going to get the worst of it are brown and black people in America. And mainly because right now, when the Roe v. Wade was announced, right, the governor of California came out and said that anyone in the United States that can travel to California, they would give them abortions, right? Anyone that has money that can afford a plane ticket or can drive from wherever they are from and get to California, they can still have abortion, right? And I know that if I got pregnant today and I wanted to have abortion, I can go wherever I want and have access to that. But the people that we're worried about when it comes to this law is potentially the young women that will get raped. And because of these laws, they will be forced to keep children that they don't want to keep. So I don't see that as different from when we say violence against women and girls that we're facing here in Africa. Because at the end of the day, you have to look at, you know, because the reason why I am able to sit here in front of you and have these conversations, right? Every girl in my family before me got married before the age of 15. A lot of my sisters are still in their marriages. They are still in abusive marriages. But because they haven't had an opportunity to get an education, and they're in the West. A lot of them are in Atlanta, some are in Germany, but because they never had an opportunity to go to a classroom, they are not able to defend themselves the way that I am.
Thank you. Very good point. I didn't get your name. You just, Jaha. So listen, I'll go back to what I was saying earlier. It is important for us to keep an eye on what is happening globally, to see how it affects us here on the continent. I am interested in what's happening on the continent. The reference you made and the examples you gave are about the United States, and it's very fresh in our minds because there's a lot happening in terms of the media. We know more about what is happening in other countries than we know of our own. Let's focus on our own challenges. If that is happening over there and your concern is about how this is going to affect us on the continent, then I can comment on that. And my comment would be proactive. If you see this coming up, you guys are advocates, you know what you're doing, be proactive. see what is happening, see what the reality is on the continent, look at the policies that we have, and think about how potentially this is going to affect us, and start working towards how we can address this on the continent. But if all we're doing is putting on our televisions and fighting virtual fights in another country on other issues without actually looking at the reality of what's happening on the continent, we will continue to lose this fight. And I keep saying it, let's understand our own policies. A lot of it we have on paper, but the reality of it is it's not being implemented. So translate that to the reality of what is happening in your own country, on your own continent, build on your own experiences. You've been a strong advocate for all these issues because of your own personal experience. How are you now translating that to the reality of what is happening in the Gambia, for example? How do we translate that through institutions such as ECOWAS, such as the African Union, to ensure that the policies, and we're able to hold our member states accountable to be able to ensure that we can use those policies to fight against the system. That is what we should be doing. I mean, honestly, I feel, like I said, very strongly about the fact that we need to understand our own realities and really fight our own fights while keeping track of what is happening in other places. And I think it's important for young people to also understand that. Another point I'd like to make, just linked to that, a final point is, you also have to understand, and I must say this based on my experience at the UN, that we also have global institutions. And in terms, so it's not just our regional and continental institutions, but also in terms of our global institutions, there are certain policies and legal documents that we've signed up to. So we also have to look in terms of our global commitments, as well as translating them not only to our continental, but also regional and national realities. So if we've signed up to the SDGs, for example, what are we talking about? How does this affect us? But those are avenues, because you also need government in addition to civil society and private sector to fight this fight collectively. Thank you.
Yeah, clear. I actually wanted to say that Aisha set us all to high standard of time, and I know that my time has run out, and it's really the start of a conversation, and that's what a fire chat is about. And I really encourage everyone to engage with Ambassador Fatima Mohammed, because I think there is a lot of spaces you're opening up in New York as well, and we've been to Ungan, we've been to CSW, and I want you to end with your commitment with the hat of, the diplomat, the one who is also in those corridors and who pushes for these advocacy in the UN Security Council, and your call to action. If we are to come out today with less talk and more action, what would that look like?
Well, thank you. Let me start by using your phrase, I am Nala. And I would say, first, I am Nala because I lead by example. I am Nala because I lift my sister up. I am Nala because I advocate especially for young women through mentoring, and that is something that I commit to do. I am doing, and I commit to do. And I would encourage all of you to continue to do that, because it's not just about intergenerational. It's not only about co-leadership, it's also about her leadership, because we do have the young people to think about, but we also have the young women to think about, and we need to be able to listen, to be able to create collectively, both with the young people, but also with the women. And finally, I would say use the opportunities that you have, the platforms that you have to continue to advocate for what you believe in. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please, a round of applause for Ambassador Amina Mohammed.